Right, we will move on to the Panuka report. David and Brenna. You've lost your partner,
I seem to have temporarily lost Brenna, Mr Chairman, yeah. I'm sure she'll be joining us. I don't propose to give too much of an introduction to the item, Mr Chairman, because we had a workshop that was well attended by councillors, so I won't sort of repeat everything that was said there. I suppose the main points really to recap are that Panuka was formed in late 2015 with a mix of objectives, but essentially looking to step up the council's footprint in the urban regeneration comprehensive redevelopment space. And fairly soon after our formation, we came to you for the approval of a program of, among other things, transform and support priority locations. Now, in addition to that, we had what we called support locations and normal disposals, which are, if you like, the way that we fund the asset sales program. As I noted a minute ago, we were set up with a mix of strategic objectives, and periodically in these forums, in our own company, stakeholders, media, we get debate about how we balance all those things out, because we obviously have a town centre regeneration strategic objective, which includes inherently investment in public amenity in these centres as we over time repurpose a number of them. We've got sustainability objectives, economic development objectives, certain locations we're trying to achieve affordability objectives, and then of course overlaying all this is a fairly significant revenue objective which carries on in our statement of intent. And indeed my observation would be that largely that revenue obligation has carried on pretty much unchanged from the pre-formation of Panuka, and really reflects the fact, for those that were here before the last election, Auckland Council Property Limited was essentially a revenue generating entity operating on a fully commercial basis. And so if we think about the future, we all need to be clear that's either the model we're working on or it's not, because clearly those strategic objectives that I listed before have resource and value implications, which we've discussed with you on a number of occasions over the last probably year. So the LTP is the place that I think we've all envisaged would ultimately be where the council needs to revisit our mix of strategic objectives and the financial kind of resource envelope that goes with that, so that we all end up with a consistent understanding of what Panuka is being funded to do in terms of those broader strategic objectives versus continuing to produce revenue. Because, as I've said a number of times, there's a clear trade-off there, and we can't do both at the same time to the degree that meets expectations. So the approach that we have, I guess, recommended to put on the table for discussion, which I had a chance to discuss at the workshop with you, is essentially building on the principle of reinvestment. We've noted that we've already got reinvestment for the transform locations, for the housing for older persons network of villages. We were optimising current service assets. All those we've already got an understanding about reinvestment. The proposal we've put for you now is to extend that really and look at the transform and unlock locations together as a program over time, where we're able to reinvest the proceeds in the, if you like, a closed loop there of that program, really recognising that as a package, and I would note that if you look at the locations, they represent quite a good balance across the region, and taken together do represent a significant strategic intervention by you through us over the next 10 years to achieve and support the growth strategy. And the smartest way, given the limitations on resources in our view, is to balance resources across that program, recognising that some areas are going to get relatively more than others out of that approach, but the reality is that at the moment all that money is taken for other purposes for the LTP. So it is a question fundamentally of how much you wish to invest in that strategy to support intensification. Our understanding, as we all do, that will need change in town centres, and a lot of the change that's required, the investment, won't come as a result of a commercial development approach. Clearly, within the proposition we put on the table, there are options, and I guess we're looking to this LTP process to really sort out on a continuum where you want us to be and to make sure we have an aligned understanding about that. So there's no understanding that we can produce outcomes that are out of line with the resources that have been allocated for it. I think that's all I need to say by way of introduction, Mr. Chairman, and we're happy to take questions.
So, does everyone understand conceptually that from the workshop that David came back, instead of presenting it as project by project, it was done as a package, because overall we can pretty well balance that package out financially, and of course it's a business case for each one, but if that chart on page 87 indicates where we've got positives and where we've got negatives, and clearly some of them, only Hanger and Northcote especially, Henson as well.
And that's still a fluid picture, obviously,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, because we're interacting in the LTP process, but the clear understanding we're putting forward is that there would be a self-funding program. Yeah.
So, Councillor, I'd just ask you not to try and focus on one individual area or anything, because that's going to come back, or the cases will come back, but remember going back about 3 or 4 years ago, we tried to get the concept of spatial priorities understood around the table. Not everyone was winning into that, so if you look at just point number 4, that pretty well sums it up, though, because that is the spatial priorities almost. As we said to Panuka, go and re-interrogate that and see that we're on the right track there, and pretty well they came back without any exception. I think that these are the areas that we need to focus on first up. It doesn't mean to say that other town centres won't get looked at, and that's where the One Initiative program has been looked at as part of the LTP, where we asked each local board to come back with something. Many of the local boards that are mentioned on this page here on 87, that's what their one priority has been worked out as, so we just then need to look at the others, and some are not asking for much and some asking for a bit more. Councillor Holst.
Thank you. I'm actually happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to the recommendation when you're ready, but my question is, when it comes to the LTP debate and discussion, is that the time when we can actually understand the wider business case that this allows for? In other words, is LTP the time when we will interrogate a little bit more closely the potential over 10, 15 to 20 years of these unlock areas to start to pay their way? Is that when that discussion might be able to be had?
Yeah, we're happy in that process to participate with whatever information you like. I think we've got the next scheduled event is the 26th, when there's a workshop, the infrastructure work stream, and obviously if you would like more detail. But essentially, yes, we would expect at some point, I mean, we obviously have a draft sort of indicative list of projects and values for each of the locations. So we're happy to share that information and pull together whatever else that you might want.
I think that would be useful, Mr. Chair, because that might mitigate some of the concerns that people have, bearing in mind we need to be putting a 10 to 20 year time frame on our planning here, not a 3-year time frame. So I'm happy to speak to it when you're ready for me to.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I was actually going to speak to it, but simply to say what you said, so I don't think I need to repeat that. So I'm just supporting the recommendations.
Okay, Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks. So, David, my question relates to the long-term, short, medium and long-term viability, rather than going back the other way, of Panuka, so you can actually do as much as you can, as well as you can, within a smaller budget from us as you can. So with these Transform and Unlock are all big projects. Is there a potential to use, through your own 10-year plan, smaller projects to add cash to help subsidise across the field where it needs to subsidise? Because some of these ones are, these big ones are long-term projects, multi-investor, long-term, and once you've got that, you're increasing risk factors and holding costs. So what I'm saying is the mix right?
Well, we think the program mix is right, because you're correct, some of them are big and long-term, but the big ones, including, for example, Manukau, it's not like nothing will happen for 8 years and then suddenly it will all appear. So these will all be progressive. We're aiming to get sites in Manukau to the market before Christmas. We're underway with some works in partnership with Auckland Transport and Putney Way. So these will be like the waterfront. Brittamart's another example where things will happen over a long period of time based on when the market's ready, and we'll be balancing expenditure. So that's the first point. The second point is that, yes, in addition to this program of Transform and Unlocks, we have other locations. Link Crescent, I think we've discussed with you before, in Stanmore Bay, there's 50 or 60 units going up there by the town centre on a site that will realise full value to go into the general asset sales program. The site that was in the news the other day, Dominion Road, same thing, 100 units, full value for ratepayers. So there's a mix across our whole program, ranging from simple disposals to one site developments, and then these bigger programs which themselves will be staggered.
So as a subscript, Mr Chair, Carol, so each project there will be some crossovers of one project helping subsidise another to get started and so forth. How would you work the accounting so you can actually see the optics of each project's bottom line?
Well, obviously we'll need, if this concept is approved, we are effectively moving money around a program of Transform and Unlocks, with the exception of the waterfront, then that will need a whole financial recording system behind it. But that's pretty much how we're organised in any case. We have location-based expenditure largely.
Right. Thank you.
And then also, quite clearly in the LTP, we've got some infrastructure, or placemaking investment already in the old annual plan, long-term plan, and probably would continue in maybe others. So there could be a new library build in one area that we're already allowing for. It's just a matter, so that does help facilitate and get areas moving a little bit earlier than would be anticipated. So, Councillor Casey.
Well, thanks for mentioning Dominion Road, David. I was going to mention it. I do have a different view from the Mayor about use of public land in terms of putting up an expensive gated community which the local board opposes. But it was about that I wanted to ask you. In your preamble you said, and I quote, "In certain locations we are trying to achieve affordability objectives." What do you mean by that? In certain locations? Is it like the Dominion Road? If you think it's a good place to put housing that's not affordable, you'll do it?
Yes, I think that question illustrates very well, Councillor, the comments I made in my introduction, which is we have a mix of objectives, and we all know that we have an obligation that you give us every year to raise, in this year, $100 million worth of sales. So quite clearly, we can't go all through this year, every location, not worrying about the revenue that we're going to receive, and prioritise other objectives completely. Equally, we don't approach any site, including Dominion Road, with no regard for these other outcomes that we have. So we have to make judgments on your behalf about the mix of objectives that we apply in each site. And so if I take two that have been in the news, Barracliff Place and Manukau, we clearly have an objective there of achieving a substantive level of affordable housing, and we're prepared to accept some trade-offs there. In other locations, what we're doing is prioritising density and good design with revenue. So the answer to your question is we have a mix of objectives, and yes, it means that as we look at different sites, we have to prioritise different things to achieve the mix of things you've asked of us.
So we don't know when and where our affordable housing will be built, really, as elected members.
Well, generally we share through the quarterly reporting and other information sharing where we're planning to incorporate affordability components to our development locations. I mean, we don't make a secret of it. We're generally pretty happy and pretty transparent about what we're trying to do in our different locations. And if you recall, one of the whole reasons that we talked to you about the significance of transform and unlock locations is because we said to you those are the areas where we would most expect these other strategic objectives to be prioritised.
So just the final question is just based on something that's in the report, but what you haven't mentioned, and it's just an expansion on the statement about exemplar residential projects. Are we going to see some green hat thinking on provision of affordable housing? I'm talking about the bottom end of the market. Is that what you mean by exemplar? Are you looking at different ways of filling that low income gap or not? I'm hoping you are, by the way, in your answer.
Yeah. Yes, exemplar, as the word suggests, means locations where we are trying to provide something that's a good example. Could be affordability, could be a sustainability objective. And so, yes, there will be examples where there will be exemplar sites where affordability is a key priority.
Great. When can we expect to see the first exemplar that would give us some
Well,
comfort?
depending how it works out, Councillor, that's what we're currently trying to get a substantial component of at Barracliff. And we're also, without going into too much detail here, we have ongoing discussions with providers of prefabricated housing, community housing providers, our partnership with Housing New Zealand. I mean, we recently did a swap with Housing New Zealand, or a sale in Avondale, to enable it to put in, I think, about 20 or 25 social housing units close to the Avondale town centre. There's another site in Avondale where 3 years ago we reached an agreement with the Housing Foundation in Trent Street, and there are 33 units gone in on shared equity basis. So this does go on and is just an ongoing part of our business, but we don't have the resources to do it in every location all the time.
I'd actually like to compliment you on what Panuka is doing in the affordable housing, because the councillors, remember, around this table, the majority decided to remove the 10% affordable housing quota out. So in effect, it's not happening anywhere else, and I say thank goodness Panuka is pursuing that aspect of affordable housing. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, David. Brenner. Just in the first instance, Mr. Chair, can I just go look at the motions? David, is your expectation today that, well, you're asking the committee to approve the reinvestment proposal? Because I heard you say something like that. Because I note, Mr. Chair, I'm being a little bit cheeky, because the first word is note, it doesn't say approve, and my understanding is that we're here to approve things, support things, oppose things, but I can understand the note in B, that's subject to budget. So can I get clarification? Is the word note the inappropriate word, and should it read support or endorse?
Happy to change it.
Well, there's been a bit of debate over the last week or two about that particular word. Sue, do you want to just comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There has been a lot of debate. I think, given the fact that the LTP process is subject to conclusion, and that is the actual decision making, the furthest that I would advise you to stretch the word note is endorse. I would advise you against saying approve at this point.
So, Mr. Chair, I think if the mover and seconder are willing, particularly on the A, I would like to see the word endorse there.
I'm more than happy to accept that if the mover and seconder are happy with that.
I'm beyond delighted.
Okay, we'll change that to endorse. Thank you, Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Just further examination of the motions as they are, David. Not all of the transforms and unlocks have high-level project plans, but the motion assumes that they do. Some they are not relevant because there are other guiding documents. I think Ormiston is one, isn't it? It's got legacy documents and it won't have a high-level project plan. So, Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to get, we've got motions here. Motions are binding. And when the motion doesn't refer to all the transform and unlocks, e.g. Ormiston, it needs to be much clearer in my view. Can I just ask David to respond on that one?
Yeah. So look, we think it's an important principle that we have high-level project plans in the program if that's the track we're going down, because that's our key accountability for you. That's the key document for councillors to see what we're planning in each area and to endorse it. So were this concept to progress to approval, we would basically do high-level project plans, a stripped-down version for both the missing locations, which, as you note, is Ormiston, and the other one is Hobsonville. We'd sort of do a retrofit just from an accountability perspective, because it is our view there should be a high-level project plan covering, you know, all the locations in this program.
Okay, so I take it that those legacy strategic documents will be reinterpreted as a high-level project plan. So that covers that off.
We'll do a refit.
And
yeah.
the Avondale one is coming up in October, so there's a little bit of presumption there that will get endorsement, so that's why it says October 17.
Okay, they're all my questions at this time. Thank you.
Yeah. Member Clark.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just going to change the tact a little bit in terms of asking the question around, I'm interested in the relationship of Panuku and Māori as a significant commercial partner. How is that relationship going? What are your indicators that the relationship is going well, if at all? And are mana whenua at the table? What is it, or what is being done to support Māori mana whenua capacity to engage?
Quite a question. I would characterise Panuku effort since our formation in building engagement and potentially commercial relationships with iwi as one of the stronger initiatives that we've put resource and time into. We have an active mana whenua forum. We have involved iwi in the development of the high-level project plans that were just referred to and the framework plans that follow them. We have agreed protocols with iwi to give a couple of months early notice of any sites that we're bringing to the market, so that mana whenua who have an interest are able to signal that and have adequate lead-in time to prepare some sort of proposal if that's what is wished. We have had a number of sites where there have been active discussions with mana whenua parties about developments, including one that's still active at the moment that I can think of.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question is about the affordable housing. When I was Minister of Housing, I'd sometimes sell a piece of land in Auraki with one house on it, so I could build 5 houses in Mount Roskill or Otahuhu. Are you working in your affordable housing objectives on the same principle, that if you put affordable housing into a high-cost piece of land, your level of subsidisation will be greater and you'll be able to build less affordable houses elsewhere? Is that part of your equation?
That's part of our thinking, definitely, yes. We obviously have to take into account where we're going to get best value for money. That's part of that mixing, consider how we mixed our different objectives, yes.
Right. The other questions I've got about are actually directly on the recommendations. I'm just wondering if you're able to estimate for us the percentage of costs for transform and unlock expenditure that you meet out of the sale of the assets.
All the indicative work we've done, including the most recent iteration, is showing that we can fund a fully credible investment program and public good expenditure from the proceeds, as long as we take them as a package minus the waterfront.
Okay, so it's a self-funding thing.
That's been our objective all along, and obviously we have choices because we can pull back or expand the investment in the public good programs depending on what we realise. But based on our current projections of value and estimations of cost, it's a self-balancing package, and that's what we're effectively asking for. That's what we would manage to.
Okay, I understand if I was in your position, I'd probably be pushing for the same thing, because then you've got a certainty of income. But I want to look at the logic of it. Why should the scale of your transform and unlock depend on your ability simply to sell assets? Why wouldn't we sell the assets that we don't need and then make a separate decision about how much, maybe more, potentially less, we would invest in transform and unlock? Why is there that direct connection between how many assets you can sell and what you do in transform and unlock?
Well, ultimately, in kind of cash or financial terms, Mayor, you're quite right, Mayor. I mean, it makes no difference, and I guess the bottom line is we're happy to have the resources whichever way it's rationalised. However, there is some strong logic to using the revenue from the sites. I mean, it's quite a common model overseas that regeneration entities are able to make use of the value that's created. It also ensures there's more discipline in the actual entity and its stakeholders around how resources are used. If people can see that if there's too big a value trade-off on a site or too much spent on one public good project, it has consequences for the rest of the program. So I think it builds a healthy value for money attitude. We've also found it makes a significant difference to community views about the sale of assets in the area if they can see it's going into, I mean, preferably people like to see it spent in their own area, but we're sure we could sell a program like this where people see that there's a prioritised group of areas where we're reinvesting back into them from that asset sales program. So to some extent it is just how you package something, but we think there are some good arguments for doing it in this way rather than taking all our money and then having another process to give us some back.
Are there disincentives in operating a model like that? For example, do you find that other members of the council group are more reluctant to pass assets across to you if you're going to dispose of them to fund transform and unlock? Has that been part of your experience?
Well, to date we haven't had this approach, but as I said at the workshop, unless there's general resistance to the sale of assets at the moment because people see it going to, a big black hole, as it were, and so the natural reaction of a lot of stakeholders is to oppose those sales. And I would see it as a better situation if we can show that there's a reinvestment approach.
Yeah, okay. But you have got flexibility within the system. If I just used a hypothetical example, if you got a big return from the sale of something in Takapuna and you didn't want to reinvest that all in Takapuna, you might transfer it to Northcote where you're doing something different. You would have that flexibility.
Yes, that's one of the points I think, Your Worship, where it came out. Perhaps I think you had another engagement during the workshop, but that's exactly why we went to a model of treating them as a program, because some areas, if each area spent what it got fully and only in its own area, some areas through just luck would end up with almost too much to eat and other areas would be left starving. So we have got, which I think is illustrated in that graph in here, and look, this is still indicative, but it shows that there is money moving around based on need.
Yeah. I guess I still come back, and this will be my last point, Mr. Chair. There's an arbitrary element between saying how much we will spend on transform and unlock will depend on how much we sell assets for. You should actually be making a separate decision on how much you want to spend on transform and unlock, and you should have a greater transparency. If you're selling an asset, it goes into the wider pool with, so that you're competing against other priorities in the LTP. If you're working in a purely logical world, that's how you'd operate, wouldn't you?
If you're working in a purely logical world, probably.
Thank you. That's good enough.
Also, Mayor, you need to recognise that often a lot of the purchasing and the selling is for the placemaking itself, so it's quite useful to tactically buy this because the plan is to put a road through part of that and part of another piece of property, and then it's swapping later to actually get the best advantage. So there's a number of situations, and Avondale's one where Panuku's strategically been buying certain pieces in order to do a swap and a sale later, and it brings a lot more discipline to the placemaking. I will take Councillor Newman.
Oh, thank you, Mr Chair. Look, I just want to acknowledge and thank Panuku for its assistance at Barracliff Place. Look, I think some of the earlier negotiations, the earlier discussions probably hit the rocks and some lessons might have been learnt, and that there is a need to really nurture those partnership relationships with social housing providers. I think Mr McDonald has been excellent, and Panuku's constructive approach to its engagement around Barracliff Place is appreciated. Barracliff's located in my ward, and I want to just commend Barracliff to colleagues as an affordable housing exemplar project. I think that we can make a really good start there, and that will be very good for a lot of people who need that outcome in the south. What I would say, of course, and my continued advocacy around Barracliff will be that it is a mixed housing urban location, so there is a need to significantly capitalise it with a lot of dwellings at that particular location, given its proximity to key transport nodes as well as Manukau. But also too that the percentage of affordable housing at that location needs to be high. It needs to yield a significant cohort of affordable housing. But I treat Barracliff as a win for Wiri, and I want to thank Mr Rankin for his commitment to it.
Now, I have Councillor Hulse who wants to speak to it. Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Watson, Member Carberry.
I've got a question.
Yeah, so who's got a question? Councillor Fletcher.
How volatile are the current projections in terms of value that you're working from in the perfect world? I'm just trying to understand, if you look at the Dominion Road site and your expectations, I mean, I don't want to do a deep dive into individual properties, but understanding the need for revenue for some of these other projects, just trying to understand just how volatile the market is, you know, in terms of your value projections. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, that's something we have to live with, that over time the property market will obviously wax and wane a bit. Hopefully we don't hit extremes, but if you take a 10-year view, which is this LTP, you'd generally expect things would sort of balance out reasonably, but you're going to have slower periods and faster periods. The other point that goes with that is at some points the cost to build some of this public amenity gets more expensive as well because of inflation in which we're seeing at the moment in the construction market. So yes, you're quite right. It's a dynamic game, and you just hope it evens out, frankly, over time.
Yeah. Which is sort of really following on from where the Mayor, his line of questions on that. Can you just give us the history to the site in Dominion Road as it was purchased by Auckland City?
Yeah, look, I think Dominion Road's a good example of how we endeavour to achieve the revenue sales target you've given us. It was a site that was bought, I think in the early 2000s or the 90s. I think originally the idea was a park and ride or something. It was declared surplus. And it wasn't in a transformer and unlocked location, so we treated it as an opportunity to get value back for ratepayers. But because we're mindful of other objectives, we thought about its location, the growth strategy, so we realised it was a good place to pursue height and density. So we actually purchased the adjoining site to get a better development block, better in terms of quality and the fact that should make a statement about good, well-designed, high-density site. We're looking at maybe 100 units probably on that site. And It's been through the urban design panel, it's achieved very positive feedback, and it will achieve a good level of value back for ratepayers for that investment.
I think it'll do much to enhance council's reputation in terms
Oh,
of
I think
development.
so, yes.
But I'll just remind you, it was actually purchased for the earlier light rail
Yes, it was,
proposal that
yeah.
would have gone through. I mean, I'm not sure whether you recall that quite correctly, but given the assurance that is not required for the new proposal for light rail, I think it's good to see a development there that will enhance the reputation of council and release much needed funds.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks. I've just got a couple of questions around the comments to do with optimisation of service assets. If I remember back to that meeting in 2015 where that went through the Finance and Performance Committee, I can't quite recall there being a hugely exhaustive list of what constitutes a service asset other than the obvious thing of like an old library or something like that. What exactly, what sort of things exactly are we talking about when we talk about service assets that local boards might be able to do this deal on?
Well, the 4 or 5 that we're actively working on as pilots, because this stuff is fairly slow and hard to execute, as you can imagine, tend to be community buildings of one form or another that are pretty run down on and are underutilising quite valuable sites. And so the propositions generally are that we get a developer comes in, redevelops the site, replicates that community facility either on the site or maybe somewhere else, but puts housing, for example, above it, or maybe some mixed-use development. So as I say, there are 3 or 4 I can think of with different local boards that we're working on right now. Some are involve redevelopment of one site, some are about selling one site completely and putting all the value into another site and getting better use of it. Another example could be poorly utilised local parks, of which we know there are a lot, that make good residential sites, and you put the money into either buying a better value local park or getting more value out of a well-used one in the locality. So that was the rationale for that policy.
Okay, so I hear like community buildings and perhaps local parks.
Yes.
So we're not talking about the ability, say, okay, you can sell off that, but we prefer if that was used in some transport thing, like some facility that's really needed. They won't. It will have to be kind of like for like is what I'm
Yeah, it's sort of it's basically taking value out of the community assets area and reinvesting it back in the community assets area, and it got too complicated trying to bring in transport stuff. So
okay. So community assets,
yeah,
anything.
libraries, parks, community facilities,
Everything that
that kind of thing.
Right. So realistically, in most local board areas, that optimisation, other than if we go to local parts, is going to be relatively restricted, the ability to do that in most cases.
Well, when you look in total, there are actually a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of underutilised community buildings of one kind or another on expensive sites, and there are a lot of underutilised parks which in the modern sense probably don't provide a lot of value. So I think over time we'll see a lot more of this, particularly with the pressure on the council's capital budgets, and we are getting a lot more interest now from local boards because they have to be an agreeing party to these or we don't bother.
Okay, so they must agree.
Absolutely, we don't waste our time on any that the local board isn't fully buying into.
Thanks.
And Panuka showed a few examples in the workshop last week. So, Member Taylor.
Kia ora, Mr Chairman. E mihi ana ki a koru e tēnei wā. I was sort of following on from Tony. there's a couple of levels for me, is that the report talks about opportunity for Māori in terms of business investment, but it doesn't say much more than that. And then in the Māori impact statement, I think it was paragraphs 52 and 53, talks about this an involvement with the high-level plans around narratives and the like. So I got two levels of question here. One is around that latter part in terms of, you said, I thought, around resourcing Māori to be involved with that. How can you evidence what you've been doing for that? Because you've said that, but how do I know what actually that means? Because just saying it's not enough, in my view. I'm not sure to what level you actually are investing in Māori in terms of the resourcing for capacity to be engaged with, which is based on that foundation charter, I think, which I have no idea what that is. But yeah, how will you be able to evidence what resourcing you are providing? Because word to me is it's not enough, it's not happening, and there's some dissatisfaction. So I'd like to be able to find out from Panuku how you can rationalise what you said about that progress.
Yep. So just to be clear, I didn't say that we were currently resourcing those. That is a live issue, and we're discussing that. What I was really saying was there are two strands to how Panuku has engaged with Mana Whenua since we were formed. One is to fully involve Mana Whenua through the use of extensive forum activity in our planning for both high-level project plans, the framework plans, the initiative recently or currently with the waterfront and city centre. The second thing that we've been trying to do, which is very much still a learning journey, is how we build more meaningful commercial opportunities with Mana Whenua. And a start with that was this 2 months prior notice period that I talked about. And there is an active discussion now about whether we have to look at maybe resourcing some of that, but that's not been concluded.
So, okay, because I raised my questions, Mr. Chairman, on the basis that it's gone from notes to endorse in A, talks about the high-level project plans. The Māori impact statement, in my view, basically was leading me to believe that that was progress in terms of working on that. And raised some concerns for me now that what I've heard is actually nil to limited resourcing occurring here. Question around specialist advice support for Mana Whenua to be engaged in all this. And now we're moving to endorse something that hasn't really got, I think, any meat to the bones in terms of what has been said about Māori in this instance. So, I mean, again, when will you get to that stage, do you think, David, in terms of that engagement with Māori so that they can participate in these high-level plans, project plans, and adequately, really?
Well, we've actually had very high levels of input and engagement from Mana Whenua on the high-level project plans and in our framework plans. That hasn't been an issue. There is, if you like, a cumulative council family issue about the amount of engagement expected with, the time and resource commitment I sense cumulative for Mana Whenua around engagement with council family, and we got that feedback with the city centre and waterfront. Significant piece of work that's going on now. But certainly to date, we've had, I would say, very strong Mana Whenua input into the high-level project plans and the framework plans. Where I think we are less mature, and it's an active discussion, is so we make early notice, we give early notice of development sites or sales sites that are coming up, whether there's a more active role for us in trying to assist a Mana Whenua entity or a subsidiary of it or a partner to equip themselves to put on a bid. That's still an open debate.
Just on the business plans that are referred to, will you be providing those business plans in their draft form to the Independent Māori Statutory Board to be able to identify the specific outcomes agreed with mana whenua before you endorse it?
When you say business plans, you mean business cases?
Oh, business cases, sorry.
So the business case tends to be more looking at the, I guess, the financials of it. But I think what you're getting at is after the framework plan, we have a stage in our process which is program business cases, and that is something we would expect to engage with mana whenua on, yes.
Yeah, which would hopefully reflect those outcomes that you're...
Correct. That's where we move to implementation mode, yes.
Sure. So my question was, will you provide those to the Independent Māori Statutory Board so they can see those as part of their legislative obligations?
Program business cases, I would expect that we would be happy to share, yes.
Thank you. So just to remind me again, last question, Mr. Chairman. Is mana whenua a strong emphasis for Panuku in terms of seeing them as a commercial partner?
Probably the honest answer to that is increasingly so. I mean, the reality, as you'll know, is that many have not had the resource base to date to take development risk or be able to invest in sites, and that's seen as changing rapidly now. So our expectation as an organisation is that will be more substantive over time.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I would encourage that sooner rather than later. I think the capacity is growing and opportunities are becoming available for Māori, particularly mana whenua, to be seen as an integral part of what's going on in the future in Auckland.
Yep.
And rather than seeing a whole lot of external parties or international investors being put before them. So.
Yep, and we've, I think, actually following the feedback I had at the Waterfront City Centre workshop, we've offered to come and have that discussion with the IMSB soon.
Thank you, David.
Councillor Cashman.
Mine's really a comment, Mr. Chair. You wanted to...
Yep, we're down to comments now.
So I'm a little bit uneasy with endorse, not because of the general theme of what's been proposed here, but we're flying a little bit blind here. So we haven't had a report from the board on the actual numbers on some of these big projects. And I think endorsing it right now may be just a little bit preemptive. You can put endorse with principle or go back to the note, in my humble opinion, just to give ourselves some comfort room over the figures through the LTP. I would say would be a more precautionary and sensible route.
Well, you're appealing to the mover and the seconder again, so not to me.
You can move it as an amendment. I'll second it.
Let's go back to note.
You're moving it?
Well,
Second it?
It's pointless then.
Councillor Darby.
Mr. Chair, this is a committee of the whole, and I thought we made decisions here. We don't just read reports and then don't do anything. It's quite unusual for a motion to come up with just a note. That's what you do in workshops. You get to this table and you make decisions. I accept the note on the B. I accept the note on the B, but I support entirely the mover and the seconder, and I hope they stick with the endorse for the A. Let's set the direction here. And this is, the first is a strategic setting, and then the B, we come to the issue that the Deputy Mayor raises. We come to look at
Each individual
all the line items and the allocations. So we're safe with the B, and we're also safe and we're clear about where we're going in the A. If we went back to just notes, the question is, why did this report come at all for us to note a report? Come on. And this is where I remind myself of that saying of the chair of Auckland Transport, we need to lubricate the decision-making process. Remember that? So let's just proceed now, as we have been asked to, I believe, from listening to our staff from Panuku, to show some clear direction to them. That's what the A asks for. And then we'll get down to the numbers in the B. So just, if I can continue speaking to the motion, I totally...
I'd like to speak as the move. I'd like the chance to speak to the motion as well at some stage. Councillor Dyer.
I totally
You were down there as
endorse
the
this
last one,
direction in the
Councillor
A, and the use of the word endorse. Look, there's a certain tension here, Mr Chair, because I...
Point of order, Chair.
I want to ask about clarification on process, on what's happened here and what Councillor Darby's speaking to. Originally, the motion was moved as notes, and then without any other thing other than someone saying we'll change, it goes to endorse. And now we're saying we're seeking an amendment to change it back to notes.
No, there is no amendment. At the moment, it stands as it is. Endorse an A and note in B.
So there was no amendment to change the original recommendation of notes?
I have not received an amendment. No, that was a suggestion which I was happy with and asked the mover in a second whether they'd change it to endorse. They did, and there were no murmurings around the table at that time. And yes, Councillor Cashmore has brought something up now, but that's his prerogative. Anyone can bring it up at any time.
Oh yeah, well, because I support that.
I mean, look, I'll comment really quickly here.
Can the movers?
What A does and endorse does is it's actually, that's the reason we set up Panuku.
Yeah.
That's as endorsing Panuku, why we set Panuku up. Okay, so that's all I'm saying. So, Councillor Darby, have you?
I was just about to conclude. So that I have a tension here. I represent the North Shore ward, but I also represent the whole of the region. But just within my ward, it's going to require the cross-pollination of capital from Takapuna to regenerate Northcote. It's still the North Shore, and Northcote is in dire need of resuscitation, revitalisation, whatever term you might need. But if we just approached it on straight reinvest out of the unlock into the same unlock, Northcote would not come out of the ground. It would just be dire forever if we followed that logic. Then there does need to be a bit of generosity across the boundaries here. And I think there's a willingness in my wider constituency of the North Shore to see that cross-pollination of capital, to see another part of the wider North Shore be revitalised. It's been a long time coming, and there has not been the political will and determination to actually see Northcote lift out of where it has been for a long time. Takapuna is already rising and it's doing pretty well, and the market will eventually, probably 5 years after our interventions there are complete, the market will actually take it on to the next stage. I also just do want to make a note about Dominion Road, Mr Chair. I think Dominion Road is a substantially better outcome than just putting it on the market and potentially seeing it go to a purchaser who might have given us best buck, but they could have actually just land banked it. That was one of the outcomes that could have, if we had, if Panuku had have just taken our motion from 2013 and put it to market, it could have just been land banked. Fortunately, Panuku have looked at wider strategic outcomes in terms of density, creating density and good design outcomes, engaged a good architecture firm, put it through the urban design panel twice, and we're getting 100 units. We're getting 9 retail units, a mixed-use development. It is definitely not a gated community. There is nothing that can suggest that that development is a gated community. Never was, never will be. But look, thanks, Mr Chair. I'll be endorsing the motions A and B as they're written.
So just point of order, Mr Chair. I was under the impression amendment was moved and seconded. Yeah. Shouldn't we be speaking to that amendment as opposed to...
I wasn't aware there was an amendment. I asked, it was just suggested, and I asked the mover and the seconder if they would be happy to change that word, and they said yes.
No, I'm talking about...
Which is quite okay. I'm not aware Councillor Cashmore said he was moving an amendment.
Oh, okay.
He didn't. Councillor Fletcher said, why don't you move an amendment? It hasn't been said. There is no amendment on the table. No one's moved it. No one's seconded it. So that's the way it is at the
Clarification?
moment. And councillor Hulse.
Speak to the
Yes.
motion that I've moved.
Yes.
And hopefully that may bring some clarity. Just remembering from standing orders, the recommendations that are in our report are a guideline. We then make the political decision on what we move. So there's no amendment involved. I'm moving that we endorse this, and I'm clear about that. The second is clear. I just want to cover a few points, and I want to just, in the first instance, address the issue that Member Taipari raised. And I think we might just need to clarify. I think I'm hearing there are concerns that this is somehow endorsing plans or some sort of operating process for Panuku. What I'm reading clearly in the Māori impact statement is that the unlocked locations offer significant scope and opportunity to deliver in all aspects to Māori and offer the opportunities for some exemplars to be developed and work with Māori as a potential commercial partner. The critical piece is on page 86, which says, however, there's no operating budget to fund unlock projects to develop non-recoverable operating expenditure, and this includes master planning, design, engagement and feasibility work that needs to be undertaken. So without the ability to cycle this money, it actually makes it more difficult to work with Māori, to partner with Māori and to look for those unlock potential gains. It simply becomes, let's flog off a piece of property, put that money back in the consolidated fund and have our fingers crossed that it somehow comes back as an opportunity to develop this as an exemplar or a good piece of work. And maybe we might find a developer that might work with Māori. I think it's completely the opposite of the concerns that are being expressed by the IMSB. This actually offers potential and hope. Business as usual doesn't, what makes it pretty damned hard. I agree with Councillor Darby, and that was the point of my enthusiasm to change this to endorse. We're in the business of city building. We're not just in the business of property management and, operating as a bit of a monopoly board for moving bits of property around. To put it quite simply, without the ability for us to have a bit of a closed loop on this funding, we miss the opportunity consistently to develop exemplar projects that allow for the kind of affordable living that Councillor Casey's talking about, for the kind of sustainability and critically world-beating urban design that Councillor Darby and I are talking about, and for simply building the kind of communities that our community expects. The bottom line is, unless we can pre-invest in developing good community outcomes, we aren't actually going to be able to push that density up. We can build all the houses we want, but we actually need to build the right kind of communities in which to put them so they become homes. We've made housing our number one, and it's the Mayor's number one priority. In the 12 months since we've been this new council, we've built 6,827 homes. We should be building 14,000. So what we're doing at the moment isn't really cutting the mustard. This is saying, let's actually lubricate the process and let's actually get on and build and make this happen. And without the funding to do the kind of planning and community building that we need, it's not going to happen. So, Mr. Chair, I think we need to put on our 5-10-year time frame thinking and get away from simply just trying to cut the budget and cut the rates for the next couple of years, because that is not going to drive this city forward. Thank you.
And remember, Panuku has to get on with things. If you look at item 14, I mean, this, the part of item 14 relates to what we're doing here and endorsing the proposal to reinvest. So I have two more speakers, Councillor Hills and Councillor Casey.
An amendment.
So we've got Councillor Hills first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not 100% sure why this has suddenly become controversial. This is the same mechanism we use for the transform. We're just saying that it should also be used for the unlock, because there is a lot going on in the unlock categories, and I would probably assume even some of those unlocks should probably be just made transforms if that's easier. But, this is either funded through rates or through the profits of, or future profits of things within the unlock and transform locations. And that's what it was set up on the transform. Secondly, Panuku was created after the LTP, the last LTP, so they don't exactly have the budgets to be doing what we're asking them to do. The other thing is, if you look at Wynyard as the exemplar from Waterfront Auckland, everything was set up in the beginning end. The restaurants, the parkland, the space, the community investment was there, and then afterwards we start collecting the profits that we invested here, because suddenly we have something to go by, something people want to buy into, something people want to invest in, because and that was the whole, well, what I see, the whole point of Panuku in the first place. People on the shore, nothing has been sold in 6 or 7 years. None of the proposals that were put up to Kaipatiki while I was there were sold. We actually increased land to get Northcote off the, and things will be sold at the end point. But to get Northcote up and running, we need to invest at the beginning, and that might mean moving money around. And I think if we wait till, we're going to wait till the LTP, or we're going to wait for another year and hold these projects up? I think the teams are already buying and moving around properties and investing in businesses and other things, so we can actually work this up. And if we don't get in now, then we're going to be in a sticky situation where actually the whole point of Panuku is not going to be able to do the job we've asked them to do. I'm personally concerned about things like affordable housing, first-time buyers, and I bring it up all the time, but we haven't set that up. The Mayor hasn't put that in his letter of expectation. That is not, we don't have the funding for that. So I'd like, the future, maybe we're working much closer with the government and working on affordable housing schemes that way. But we have to be real here. We either try and use ratepayers' money to fund affordable housing, or we don't do any of this development at all. And I don't want Panuku to just be a buying and selling, bits of land. That's pretty boring and unimaginative, and we're actually not going to get probably the investment we could get if we invest first. And we're not going to get things like in Northcote, new community facilities, new parks, new cycleways, new public spaces on rates. We know we don't have that funding, so we have to do this to eventually get funding that is not ratepayer funded. So we either support Panuku to do the work they want to do, or we just sit here again and wait, which I don't think is a good idea. Thank you.
Well, the bottom line is if we throttle Panuku, a government will come in and just put in economic development agency anyway. So basically, this is our chance to do it ourselves and do it properly. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, I'm back to where we were at the beginning of this meeting. The purpose of this paper is to inform the committee and provide clarity. We've been informed and clarity is being provided, but we're not there yet. And before I get accused of throttling Panuku or, trying to be a naysayer, we're supposed to be working with the local boards, and Panuku in its report says, if you look at page 89, Panuku is aware that there may be a wide range or a range of views from other local boards which are not captured here. There's only 4 local board views that are captured. They're all positive, that's great. But I'd like to hear from the other 17, and that's supposed to be what we're doing. And I know it takes time and it's messy, but there is no rush here at all. So I'm very happy. This was a voting report. I must have missed the bit where you changed it to something else, because I wouldn't have supported that. So back to noting, so I'm moving that we, as the report started out today, we're noting something, that's fine, but there's more work to be done here, especially with the local boards. So if there is a seconder,
Okay, so you're moving an amendment, Councillor Casey. Do you have a seconder? Okay.
Yeah, I've got a seconder.
Right, well, we're back to square one. So we have an amendment, okay? So the bottom line, I'd just like for councillors to actually reflect on what Councillor Hulse said. 6,000 houses built. In the last year, we need at least 14,000. Why not? Let's slow it down some more, I say. So we have a mover and a seconder. So the amendment is note. Okay, so I'm going to go back to note on the first one. Now, who would like to speak to this?
Oh, come on, Ross.
Right, Member Taipui, why not?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I support the amendment. I support the amendment. And of course, when you rewind the webcast, you're going to be able to see what happened in a matter of order today. When it was originally moved, notes at second, and then it was changed to endorse without any formal amendment. And so I say that's the proper process that was actually held, and you have evidence of that because things were videoed. So rather than be sort of told,
Actually,
well, hang on a
my
minute.
member Typee, I'm going to just put
Well,
it.
I'm getting to the
Councillor
point.
Holtz actually pointed out the process. The process, there's nothing wrong with the process and the way I handled that.
No.
I'm allowed to do that. That is prerogative, okay? Now there's an amendment and we're accepting this amendment to be voted on.
That's right, and that's why I'm supporting the amendment as it was originally
Yes.
not moved and seconded, based on the recommendations of the staff. And I support that because of the words that have already been said. There's more to be done. And it's my view that there is more to be done as well. And we don't need to be rushing into endorse. And I hear that it may be starved of resource. Well, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. But it needs to have more work done, and I'm going to support the amendment.
Other speakers?
Just vote on it.
Councillor
Yeah,
Darby.
I will say something briefly. It's this sort of motion, this is one of the things that contributes to the housing crisis that we've got. It does. It does. It is the slowness of decision-making, and I witness it here at this table far too often. There is a crisis to provide housing out there. I thought we were giving Panuku some strategic direction here today to proceed to address that issue in its small part. This just puts the handbrake on it.
It does actually, because if I'm hearing from some people, you know. So anyone else that wants to speak to this? Right, so I'm assuming you want it by division, councillor Casey?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Right, so we're going to have this by division. So the amendment in effect is just one word, which is taking out endorse and putting in note.
Spoken me out of the vote.
Councillor Clow,
No.
Councillor Casey,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore,
Yes.
Councillor Collins,
Against.
Councillor Darby,
Against.
Councillor Filipaina,
Against.
Councillor Fletcher,
For.
Councillor Hills,
Against.
Member Kake,
For.
Councillor Hulse,
No.
Councillor Lee,
Against.
Councillor Newman,
For.
Councillor Sayers,
For.
Councillor Simpson,
For.
Councillor Stewart,
For.
Member Taipari,
For.
Councillor Sir John Walker,
For.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Right, it's carried 11 to 7, so we now go to the substantive. So we've got A 1 and 2 substantive. You want that by division, anyone?
No.
No. So I'll put those two motions and moved. Actually, I'm asking, does the original mover want to still be an original mover?
Actually, no, because I agree. I think we are going backwards, so I'll let someone else move a
I'll take my name off the
Vanilla.
second as well.
A
Okay, the
vanilla
mover and second are
recommendation.
taking their names off, so proudly stepping up is Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Simpson. Got the two motions, we've got a mover and a second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? No. Right. Thank you, Brenna.
Blimey.
Thank you for the report. Thank you, David. Right, we move on.